Southern Sports Gumbo on a Sunday night, the night before the national championship game with Miami and Indiana tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit of the championship game and a little bit of the portal. We're going to start with the championship game from a standpoint of the matchups, position matchups with these teams. Talk a little bit about what is key for each team to win, what matchups they have to win, what area that team has to win, and then give predictions, and then we will talk about some transfer portal stuff. So let's start on offense and let's go offensive line. Sweets, what's your thoughts on that matchup?
I mean, the biggest matchup along the lines for me is going to be the Ruben Bain versus Mesidor and Carter Smith matchup. Indiana's two offensive tackles, along with Khalil Benson. It's probably the most important matchup of the game from from Miami's standpoint, as far as needing to have success in this to put pressure on to Mendoza and to cause him to be uncomfortable back there. That they need to get that pressure to have a chance to win the game. Carter Smith hasn't given up a sack all season. Benson's only given up four. So that might be something to look for is Bain, lining up over Benson if they feel that that's a matchup that will get him to the backfield, causing more issues back there. That'll be a good one. Another big matchup for me is going to be Malachi Tony and D'Angelo Pawns. Tony, the fast receiver for the Canes against Pawns. That kid's just been popping people all playoff long. He's been fantastic, as good a DB that he's played as good at DB as anybody in the nation in the playoffs. It's going to be that'll be a great matchup as well. We'll see if Shannon Dawson's able to scheme enough to get Tony the ball in space, and if he's able to do that, Miami can have some success throwing the ball, be it on short screen passes to him or trying to get him across the middle on a pick play or something. Just getting him the ball in space and letting him do what he does. And then we talk about the turnover battle. Indiana is plus 21 on the year in turnover margin. Miami is plus 11. And that stands to reason. Both these teams are high positives in that, and they're both playing in the national championship. Being winners in that turnover battle is a huge contributor to them both being here. And my opinion, I think Indiana is the better team. But if Miami gets a turnover or two, or even a key stop, I think it's going to be a close game, and I look forward to that. Those are some of my keys to the game. Kev, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, if I just look at the position group offensive line, I think both these teams have very good offensive lines. You mentioned Indiana and their tackles, and then when you flip it over to Miami's offensive line, their offensive line has been really key in the playoffs. They've been dominant and allowed their running game and Fletcher to get going. And so I think, this is one of the closer matchups in this game. If you just look position by position, it's really hard for me to choose who I think is better at this position group. And I think it's more you got to look at the matchup of what they're going to try to do, which even makes it even that much harder. Because obviously with Indiana, they're going to mix it up. They're going to run the ball a little more than they throw it, but they're going to throw the ball early. Their ammo has been to throw early, get the lead, and then run the ball once they get up 2 or 3 scores, and just take the clock and physically dominate somebody. So, and then on the flip side of it, Miami has to win the interior part of the line of scrimmage to run the ball, which is what has been their key to success in these playoffs. So, and then in Indiana's not been pushed around on the defensive line. I think that this offensive line matchup, that's why I mentioned it first, is just I think it's going to be so key to this game. And if I'm going to rate it, I would probably call it neutral, but then I would also go back and I think this is probably the most important matchup for both of these teams. Is that which team's offensive line can establish the most dominance? Miami's key, to me, a key for Miami in this game is they have to continue what they've done in the playoffs. They've been 55% on third down conversions. which that's been because of what they've gained on first down. They've won the time of possession battle. They were big in the time of possession battle against Ole Miss, and they won the time of possession in all three games. And they've been dominant in the run game. So they have to, they have to establish that in this game. And then if you look at Indiana, the three games that they've been in this year were the games were close and tough wins. At Iowa, which was a touchdown game, Ohio State, and the game they had to come back against Penn State. Teams that either win the time of possession against Indiana or are right there with them, virtually a lock on or a draw on time of possession, and then penalties. If Indiana doesn't have very many penalties in the game, so the teams that can match Indiana with time of possession and penalties, not have more penalties in Indiana, those are the teams that's played them to the wire and almost beat them. And so, when you look at Miami, they can certainly match that time of possession piece. There's been games this year where they have had penalties, like in the SMU game where they dominated time of possession, 47 minutes to 23, and then or 37 minutes to 23, and then they lost the penalty battle by having 12 penalties in that game, and that's what kept SMU in that game. So I think the keys to this game are at the line of scrimmage on the offensive side to establish that, to try to do what both teams want to do offensively. So I'm going to call that one a draw. So if we move from there, let's go to quarterbacks. This is an interesting one. You got the Heisman winner, and then you've got Beck, who's played well in the playoffs, and again converted 55% of his third downs in the playoffs. What's your thought on the quarterback position?
Obviously, Indiana's got the advantage in the matchup. Mendoza, the Heisman winner, has been as consistent as any quarterback in the country all season long, making the smart plays, not turning the ball over and stuff like that. I think Beck might be a little more, kind of crazy to say, but like I think if one of them were going to come up with a big play during the game, I think Beck would be the one to come up with maybe a key crazy third down scramble or getting evading pressure and hooking up with Tony on a bomb or something like that. I think that Beck has that potential more so than Mendoza, like I said, but it's hard to go against Mendoza being the Heisman winner and just as consistent he's been, especially in the playoffs. I mean, Indiana's not throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game. They're throwing it 22, 25 times a game, and he's completing, 70+% of those passes. When you're doing that, it's tough to, it's tough to keep a team down. He throws to Elijah Surratt, who leads the country with 15 receiving touchdowns. Their run game solid. Their line, we've heard them talked about all season long. And listen, I don't care if those guys are a bunch of 35-year-olds on the offensive and defensive lines. Everybody else had the same opportunity to go get these same players and get them on their team as well. So the fact that Indiana did it, plugged them in, and it's working, kudos to Cignetti. I can't say enough about how incredible not only his coaching, but his evaluation and development. That whole staff over the past few seasons has been phenomenal. Hats off to the whole staff. They deserve everything they get. And if they do win tomorrow night, it's certainly deserved. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, again, I love Mendoza and I love his accuracy. And I think, what he's done in the playoffs has even shown more of that. He's only got one 300-yard game this year, but he is so efficient. And the way that they play, again, they don't make mistakes. They capitalize when another team make mistakes. They get teams down. So, he's over 70% completion, and he's so efficient. But he gets to, in the first halves, he does throw the ball. But when they get ahead, they gear the game down, run it, take care of the clock, and play physical. But to me, I think even though he won the Heisman, I'm going to say that he's underrated just because I don't think unless you really, really watch him play and where he puts the ball on 50-50 balls, you don't really appreciate how accurate he is. But, again, I think he's got like 5-6 incompletions the last two games. That speaks to something. But I do like, kind of like what you mentioned with Beck and Tony. Mendoza's the better quarterback, but I do think Beck in this game, has a chance to make some plays. And I think he's going to look at it as, what does he have to lose? I think this is his game to be that way. He is an experienced guy. Everybody talks about, well, he's had moments where he's thrown interceptions, and he has, but he doesn't have a lot of interceptions on the year this year. And he had a couple of bad games where he did, but other than that, he's been pretty efficient. And again, that offensive line, if they can establish themselves and they can run the ball, I think they can set themselves up. And Tony's the best wide receiver in this game, even though Indiana has a couple of good ones. Tony is the best wide receiver in this game, even though he's young. So I do think Beck will hit a couple of plays in this game. And I think, my Indiana with their presence to try to stop the running game for Miami, I think there's a chance that they can beat them over the top, a couple of times. So I like the matchup for both teams and how they're playing. And I think both quarterbacks. I really honestly think both quarterbacks are going to play well in this game. I think Mendoza has an advantage, but I think both quarterbacks are going to play well. I think this being the 16th game for both these teams, I guess Miami, it's actually their 17th game because they got a bye, or they didn't get a bye the first round. I think both teams have played enough games where I think we're past, a quarterback having a bunch of mistakes. So I think it'll be, two experienced senior quarterbacks. I think both will play well. Mendoza's got the advantage, in my opinion.
It's like you say, Miami only this is their 15th because they didn't have the conference championship game.
That's right.
And Indiana did, so they're they're on the same amount of games. But like I said, I was just looking at their stats for the season. And Beck has completed 73.3% of his passes for just under 3,600 yards, 29 TDs, 11 picks. By comparison, Mendoza has completed 73% of his passes for 3,349 yards, 41 TDs to 6 picks. So the big disparity is in the touchdowns and interceptions. I think there were 2 games that Beck had 3+ interceptions in. You take away those 2 games, and he's been a mirror of Mendoza all season long.
Right.
I just think that the way Miami's offense structured versus the way Indiana's defenses or offense is structured, it makes it it doesn't appear that they had such similar seasons. I was looking at Indiana. They've got just under 3,000 rushing yards on the season. I mean, that's an insane. They average 5.5 a carry. That offensive line just bullies people. And like I said, we've heard about the center from Notre Dame is 25 or whatever, and some other dude. They said his first grandchild's due next week or whatever. So what? You know what? Everybody else had a chance to go get these kids too, and didn't. So it's time to just let them drop and see who the better team is. I'm really looking forward to the game tomorrow night. Won't be surprised if Miami wins either. I don't know that they will, but I won't be surprised because I think, like I said, when we talked about it in September and early October, Miami was the best team in the nation at that point. I mean, they were playing that well. If Miami can channel that, tomorrow night's going to be a lot of fun to watch. A lot of fun to watch. It started at 7.5. I see some are still at 7.5, and others have Indiana at 8 and 8.5. So I'm guessing the line's going to be about 8. What are your thoughts on it, Kev? What's your prediction and who covers?
So I think Indiana wins the game, but I think Miami's going to keep it within that 8.5 point spread. I think I like the game to be 27-23 with Indiana winning, but I'm not going to be surprised if Miami pulls this game out. You look at some other matchups. You take Indiana's wide receivers, and because it's a good group. Surratt, Williams, Cooper. They've had some good advantages this year and played well. They've been really good in the playoffs. And you pair that against Miami's secondary, especially with Lucas out the first half. And I think another interesting thing within that piece if Miami wins the coin toss, do they take the ball first to try to take advantage of the fact that not putting their defense on the field with Lucas out of the game in that first half? I think that's another thing that possibly could happen. But you look at that matchup and you say, "Wow, Indiana's got the advantage there with Lucas out and with their wide receiver group." And while that may be true, once we've gotten the playoffs here, nobody's thrown the ball all over Miami's secondary.
No,
Even though if you just look at individual matchups, Texas A&M didn't,
no.
and they have Concepcion. He's great. Ohio State with Jeremiah Smith, who's the best wide receiver in college football. They didn't throw the ball all over him. And a lot of that is, again, because Miami can get pressure with four and they can drop and cover. And, Chambliss had his moments and he did, throw the ball and get some yards and made some plays. That being said, if they dropped four interceptions in that game, if they catch two of those, again, that's not even a close game. And I think you get a chance to see that again this week with that pressure with four. And going back to that matchup with the offensive line, that's another interesting matchup to me. Can Indiana's receivers do something that other teams in the playoffs haven't been able to do and be effective against Miami's secondary, especially with Lucas out? So, what's your thoughts? What's your prediction
No,
on the game?
first off, I agree, and I think that was a very astute comment. Talking about him missing the first half, and Miami, if they win the toss, I think it would be wise to say, hey, our one of our top guys is on the sideline. Let's try to spend as much time on offense as we can, and and play the odds. Because it would be a difference of one possession, possibly. So, why not take every advantage you can for your team. Um, I think I everything points to Indiana winning the game, um, but I got this strange feeling that Miami is going to pull it out, and I don't know why because I think that Indiana's is consistent and sound as a football team, and people tell you every year you hear the greatest team of all time comparisons and obviously this year they're undefeated and they've only had the one close game and stuff. There's it sounds funny to say, but there's kind of a lack of star power on Indiana. It sounds funny because they got the Heisman Trophy winner, but if you think about it, who what if you ask the average college football fan to name four guys on Indiana's football team, I'll bet you the average football fan couldn't. We can because this is what we do. But I think if you asked Bob, who has season tickets for the University of Georgia, Bob, name four guys on Indiana's team, he could probably name two or three. It's just they just do everything right. They're consistent, they're smart, and they're a Saban like coach team with Cignetti. Win this play, win your job. Just win this battle, this one individual 5-second battle. Then we'll worry about the next one. We're not worried about the game. We're worried about this play right now. Like I said, as much as I love Indiana, I just have a funny feeling about Miami. So I'm going to go ahead and pick an upset here. I'm going to take the Canes 24, Indiana 20, which means that you should probably bet your life savings on Indiana to cover. But I just think that Beck is gonna his last game in his very long and storied college career. I think that he's going to let them all hang out and do enough to sneak out a victory. So I'm gonna take Miami 24-20. Um, you know, Honestly, in my heart of hearts, I want Indiana to win. I really do. I think it's a great story. Love what Cignetti's done with the program. The kids are humble. Fun team to watch. But I don't know, something about Miami's talent and flash and stuff. But they've got some true playmakers on both sides of the ball, and I think they're going to sneak out the upset.
I think it's really possible. Again, I think the thing that has really helped Indiana in these playoffs where they've been dominant is teams making mistakes early. Oregon did.
Yeah.
Bama went for that fourth down. And again, if you commit to staying in the game, running the football, having success with the line of scrimmage, don't try to extend yourself. Just play within yourself and don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
You can play with Indiana, but the thing is if you get down
Yeah.
2, 3 scores to them, then that's when everything changes.
Oh, hey, listen, if Indiana gets up 14-0 on Miami, it's probably a wrap because then they're gonna do what they do. They're gonna sit on it. They're gonna run for 4 yards of carry, and that with those, with that grown up offensive line of theirs, they're just sludge down the field, eat up time, and protect that lead. That will be Miami's worst nightmare to start like Oregon did. Um, but I think that like I said, I think that I'm really interested to see what they're going to scheme for Miami in this game, knowing having watched Indiana for especially through the playoffs, and seeing if they can exploit any weakness. Because honestly, at all three levels, Indiana is great. They're not. Their defensive line is tough. Their linebackers are great, and their secondary is great. So they don't really. I don't know a soft spot that you pick out and attack. Maybe an individual player or two that they're going to target. But I just they don't have a lot of weaknesses.
That's right. Miami again, though we've talked about this a lot. Miami is the one team that can match up with Indiana on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Indiana's been dominant, and again, we both have said it a couple of times in this. To me, that is going to be the fun part of watching this game tomorrow, is to just watch the matchup at the line of scrimmage. I think that everybody, if you're a football fan, when you sit down to watch this game, especially the first half, watch the line of scrimmage as you're watching the game. That's going to be a really interesting battle, and I think it could be a game where both teams get their share of wins.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm like you. I think I would pick Indiana, but I really think it's going to be a closer game than many think. And I think one of the things that's going to hurt Indiana in this game is, since the Big Ten championship, they've had these first two matchups. The other teams have made mistakes and then got down and then basically just got manhandled and then kind of just tucked and ran. I don't see that happening with Miami, and I think Indiana. I think Signetti will do everything he can to have them focused. That being said, it's not easy when you've had it easy to come out in a game and think that it's going to be another easy one. It's going to be very easy for them to have the mindset of we've been dominant. We just got to go out here and we just got to do this one more time. And maybe you lose a little bit of focus. And Miami's not the team to do that with. Like you mentioned, that the first year they were playing better than anybody, and they do have grown men at the line of scrimmage too. So
Yeah, it'll be. I'm curious to see. I want Indiana to get punched in the mouth. I want to see a good game more than anything. Like I said, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I would like Indiana to win. Something in my gut tells me Miami will, but I want to see a good game, and to make that happen, Miami's going to need to come out and punch Indiana in the mouth, and let them know that they're in a dogfight and see how Indiana responds, because like you said, they haven't had a ton of those this year. Now they had one against Ohio State in the Big Ten Conference Championship. It was a close game. And then the game against Penn State, but other than that, they haven't been in a lot of nail biting games, and they haven't had that internal fortitude tested, on the big stage. So if they get punched in the mouth tomorrow night, Miami comes out and maybe Miami gets up on 10, 14 points. How does Indiana respond? Do they panic and start throwing it around a little more? Do they stick to their what they've done all year? That we haven't seen, we don't know. So it's that'll be something I'm looking forward to as well.
so let's transition from there. Let's talk a little bit of transfer portal. We're probably 80% through with the transfer portal. Let's talk again a little bit winners and losers and any latest developments since we've talked, about it the other day. Um, there's still some good players out there. So again, just any thoughts that you have on recent or just the transfer portal in totality.
Um, you know, I, I was looking on there today because teams had until, I guess it was yesterday or midnight Friday or whatever, and then teams have, I think it's either 48 or 72 hours after the player has submitted his paperwork to the school to turn it into the NCAA. So there still could be some guys come out. I believe there's people who still could be going into the portal that we don't know about yet. And depending on who some of those people are, certainly from an LSU standpoint, we still have needs. LSU has done yeoman's work in the portal so far, but you still you still got depth and plenty of needs. That being said, overall the portal has been an absolute shit show and a joke. You've got thousands of kids, and as harsh as this is to say, I really hope some of these kids don't get picked up by anybody, and I'll tell you why. Because you know everybody thinks that the grass is always greener, and these kids got it good. These kids they're all making a little NIL money now. Every single D1 player is getting a share of that now. Obviously some are making a lot more than others, but some of these kids who are um, playing at your Ole Misses, at your Georgias, at your LSU's, at your Bamas, are looking and saying, well, you know, th- this guy's making. I'm gonna put my name in there because I can get more. And I think there are a lot of these kids that are maybe second tier guys that are depth pieces on their current teams that are, you know, that's who they are, and they're not going to put themselves in a better position. They're going to end up without a school to go to, and it's really going to suck for them. But I think that I think some crazy things have to happen to change the way things are on the portal, because it just I don't like the portal. I don't like the way NIL set up. I mean, if you want to pay the kids, fine, but come up with something that's equitable and that's feasible, because a $40 million budget for your football team every year is not something that a lot of schools can pony up to. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a bigger chasm between the haves and the have-nots. Right now there are probably about maybe 12 to 15 schools that legitimately in my mind could, year in year out find that money for at least say the next 10 years or so. But something's got to change long before then, in my opinion, because this has just gone on too long with free agency and stuff. Kev, I'm gonna hop off my soapbox and let you talk. I don't know. It's just it's insane. I mean, like I say, I think it's great for the kids, and I think that they're able to have a little money in their pockets, which was the intent to begin with, is good. But having these kids being the breadwinners in your family as an 18-year-old isn't a healthy situation for any of them. And these are the kids I'm talking about that are looking for all the money they can get right this second. And most of the time it's because they have people telling them, let's do this, let's get this, let's get this, and not doing the best for themselves from a developmental or just life standpoint of it all. What do you think?
Yeah, I think just a couple of things to tag on to what you're saying there. So number one, to me, this has been the worst year of basically just total free agency. I mean, you got if you're a good player, every team, all the good players basically renegotiated. So if you didn't hit the portal, you still renegotiated. And I think that has to change. We've talked about it. There has to be something done to where you can get players on at least a 2-year contract. This transferring every year, this kind of stuff, it makes no sense. One thing that we've not talked about, but that is realistic to put this in even more in a more of a perspective. When these guys, these top players, and there's a lot of them, the top few hundred players in college football, when they transfer and they're making these visits, it's not just about going to the school and seeing the facilities. What does that have for me? The coaches and that. You got real estate agents that are taking
Oh
these
yeah.
guys
Oh, it's
to look for,
insane.
these big houses and this kind of stuff. That is not what college is. That is basically professional sports. I have nothing against them making money. I have nothing against them making good money. I love it. I love college football. I love sports. So let them make money. But the levels that we're at, it's just crazy. So I just think that I agree with you. We've got to do some things to get this more in line. That being said, just a couple of winners and losers. We've covered that a little just to kind of cover some more, maybe some different. Obviously, Iowa State's a big loser in this, and Penn State's a big winner. From that, Indiana's another winner. Signetti had another year where he was very efficient. Got Nick Marsh and Hoover, the quarterback from TCU. A loser to me is Auburn. The quality of the players that they lost defensively, Amaris Williams, Jay Crawford, Antonio Coleman, Malik Blockton, and then on offense, Cam Coleman and Deuce Knight. Now they did bring in the quarterback from USF, and they've got some good players, but they lost some quality players. I'll tell you another team that I look at, and it's the first year in probably 18 years that their roster is going to face what it is, and that's Alabama. Going into this season, we talked about Alabama and how I felt like they had the highest floor. We all kind of felt like that 9-3 would probably be where their bottom would be. That's going to be different next year. When you look at their line of scrimmage, it's a very different Alabama football team next year. Offensively, most of their line of scrimmage on the offensive line is going to be freshman, sophomore type guys. And when I say freshman, redshirt freshmen, sophomore players with very little experience. They have not had an offensive line in that scenario since Saban became the coach there. Now they may coach those guys up, but you look at their transfer portal guys. Most of them are redshirt freshmen. So I really think Alabama is going to be a different team next year. You look at their linebackers. Again, it's redshirt freshmen, it's sophomores. And these weren't guys, they're solid players out of high school, solid 4-star type players, but they're not five-star. They're 5-star players. They're not high 4-star guys. So that's very different. And then even on their defensive line, they've got a couple of transfers on their defensive line. But again, they're younger type players. Well, Kingsby and then the transfer from Oregon are 3-year guys, but they're not standout guys. They're solid players.
Depth
But
pieces in some
go ahead.
depth pieces in some cases.
Yes, depth pieces. But to that point, they don't. These are guys that are going to start. They don't have a lot of depth on that defensive line either. So again, they've not had a situation where they didn't have 6, 8 deep across the defensive line and a lot of experience on the offensive line. And they're going to have that next year. So I would put them as a loser just because they lost talent that they're not going to replace. Some of that talent, Proctor, Brailsworth went to the NFL or going to the NFL, but still you lose it. Defensive line, Keenan, and some of those guys that are going to the NFL. So you lose key players there. They lost Keeley. Now Alabama does have Ryan Williams. They have Lotzer Brooks, good wide receiver. They're going to have, I think, between Mack and Keelan Russell, they'll have a good quarterback. And their secondary is really good. I would say their secondary players are elite talent guys. Running back, though, is another one. Daniel Hill's going to be the guy. They lost Hollywood Smothers that they were wanting, and he ended up going to Texas. Hill's a solid back, but again, he's not an elite back. So you're going to have a lot of average on that Bama team next year. Now, I don't think they're going to have a losing record, but I do think 8-4 is a possibility for them next year with a floor of 7-5, unless they surprise and go land some people. And you reference teams that can throw 40 million. Bama had a lot of years where they had advantages with money before the NIL. But right now they do not. They are not one of the teams that is throwing money like some of these top teams are. So I just think that's an interesting thing there. Again, winners, Penn State, and then a lot of those Iowa State guys that came to there.
Penn State,
Texas,
the Penn State Cyclones.
that's right. That's right. Texas with Cam Coleman, they signed, and Hollywood Smothers. They signed some talented guys. Spent some money there, and again, they're one of the rosters that could go into that 40 million range next year. Ole Miss, as the way that this is played out down the stretch, the way that the portal closed, I would definitely have them in that loser category too. They're losing a whole lot. They're keeping Lacey. If Chambliss wins his appeal, And I don't think that's a guarantee. Even if the judge is from Mississippi,
They seem to feel pretty good about it, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I just don't, I mean, if yeah,
tonsillitis doesn't keep you out a season.
it's just, if he wins the case, at this point they should just say the NCAA is just, they're useless because there's no reason why that kid should get a medical red. I think that's what he's vying for, is a medical,
Yeah,
because he had a toothache in late November or something. I don't know,
he had
but
tonsillitis.
yeah, okay,
That's a week.
yeah,
That's a week.
yeah, that's yeah,
And,
that's
his
and wasn't
sophomore.
it later in the year too?
Yeah, yeah,
I
it
mean,
was.
so it wasn't like it was in September. I think it was like in November. Yeah, and listen, a great player. I don't know
Yeah,
why he's not going to the NFL anyway. Honestly, I mean,
right.
I'm assuming that the NFL doesn't think as highly of him as I do as a quarterback, because I think he might be the top quarterback in the draft, if if not certainly top three. If you're top three, you need to go. I tell any quarterback that. But we'll see. I can't see him come back. Now, if he doesn't come back, where do they go?
Exactly. So if again, they've already lost wide receivers. And Caden Lee entered the portal, and they had people graduate. They have not refilled that. So you got Deuce Knight and Walker Howard are your quarterbacks. Knight's a talented guy. Howard was a 5-star, but he's not. In his college career, he's 4 years in, and he's not. Had those moments. And then again, you look at their defense, which at the beginning of the year was not very good. Look at all they've lost on defense in the portal. They lost both starting linebackers.
Godfrey
Um,
sucks. They said that
yeah,
I'm pretty sure I read they said that he was garbage, and I
100,
recognize.
170 tackles over the
Yeah,
last 2 years.
yeah, he led their team in tackles, and I think plays as well. He had the most plays, and I'm like, I
If he's
understand
that bad, if he's
upset
that
for
bad, good
losing
luck to
player, but
replace
yeah, saying that the guy who had more tackles than anybody on your team for the past 2 years is, hot dog water is just silly.
him. And
There's
if you
I'll say
lose
this:
off
the
that defense,
Oxford going to be a lot of fun next September. Oxford,
yeah,
and it's going to be crazy too. I think that Coach Lane Kiffin probably should have some extra security with him for that weekend, because some of those Ole Miss fans are kooks. Not some of their fans, hell, some of the people on there. What's Spirit? I think it's Spirit
yeah,
Ben is what he calls himself or
yeah.
whatever.
Hmm.
What the holy hell? You're a grown ass man. Go. I mean, that was embarrassing. I was embarrassed for him. It was. Have you seen that? Have you?
Yes, there's Rant.
Woo.
More than one he's had. It's been entertaining. I've actually watched it for some humor. He loves to compare everything to wrestling. I guess he had this wrestling fetish growing up, and he loves to compare Kiffin, calls him a hoe, and then you know compares him to wrestling, the NWO, and the Ultimate Heel. I don't want to get into that. I'm just
I,
saying what he
I
does.
got
It's
50.
crazy.
Kiffin would slap the shit out of him
Yeah,
if they were face to face.
yeah,
I just was he the one that Billy had the trouble with? Billy
it
should have
is.
slapped the shit
He
out of that
sure
guy
was.
before he left.
He sure was. I can't believe
Orf.
I can't believe that 0-3 has not at least reprimanded the guy.
Oh yeah.
I guess he's getting good ratings right now with the Ole Miss fan base, but his professionalism is awful.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. And Terry usually runs a pretty tight ship when it comes
he
to
does.
that stuff. But um, it's. I mean, what are you going to do? At least I get they were. You've lost your coach, you lost your offensive staff, and then you had a few players follow him. I mean, and it could have been a lot worse. I think that Kiffin could have signed more Ole Miss kids if if he wanted them. I think there are more kids that would have came over. Um, Obviously, we would have liked to have the Eccles kid would have been a great pickup. The Umalian, or however you pronounce his name, that would have been a great. But there are a few kids on that team that would I'd love to see in purple and gold. But their fan base crying about tampering and this and that. I mean, the LSU players that they got to, I mean, okay, they followed their coach. Take, whatever. It's a better opportunity for them. Who cares? But when you're representing the site and you're representing a company, and and talking like that, I honestly thought the guy might lose his job over it, but I guess, like you said, he's getting the ratings, and they gotta have somebody to hate. So why not make it Kiffin and LSU? But that's a good thing, though. It's a good thing because it's gonna create a little more intensity in the rivalry, and it'll bleed into other sports as well, and make it fun again.
And not just Kiffin next year. LSU fans, look, they're going to have a lot of LSU fans to go over for that game. LSU fans better be careful on that game too, because the Oxford Police would love to put a lot of LSU fans in jail just for the heck of it.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah,
it's one of those games. Go to it, enjoy it, be loud, but be very careful about your things because it is the true Old South in Oxford, Mississippi.
oh yeah. I buy, but you know what? Payback and karma's a bitch. So
Well, and you know, again, they've lost offensive line players. They've lost, Devin Harper, Ethan Fields, which I'm not sure Fields is that good a player, but he would have probably been a starter for him next year. So they've lost a couple starters there. Their tackles were both seniors this year. Um, again, and Prince is supposedly still entering the portal. He's just going to have a lot of teams after him. They're just lost too much.
you said he is going into the portal.
Yeah, that's the word that he's still entering the portal. They're trying to keep him, but his paperwork is turned in, and if they can't reach an agreement with him, you're going to have he'll do the tour like others. He'll go to LSU, he'll go to Oregon, and I've heard Texas and Texas Tech will be interested in him too. So
Ohio State.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
I was looking at that too, and in the portal, I mean, with all the whining about tampering and all that shit. I mean, could you imagine Ole Miss fans if Kiffin pulled a Matt Campbell and basically just took the whole damn team and packed them up and headed west? I mean, because Campbell got what? Look at it here. It was over 20. I think it was 24. Was the latest number of kids that transferred from Iowa State to Penn State. I mean, if that's not considered tampering, then they should never look at another case of it, because that's obviously, um but that's, I mean, you're a head coach, you know what these kids are making, you know them intimately, you recruited all of them, so you know which ones you want and you think of with you, and which ones are, you know better off staying where they are. um and a lot of it is about the opportunity down the road. I mean, there could be some good players at Iowa State that he didn't take because they're already good at that position at Penn State. So it just, you just get the, every coach is, this is what college football is now. You recruit your roster every year, you recruit everybody else's roster every year, and you recruit high school every year. And that's why I could see a Marcus Freeman or a Kirby Smart or someone like that, while they're still relatively young, taking a shot at a professional job if they were going to, because the college job is literally a 365-day a year job now, with having to recruit your own players, not just from season to season, but I mean, it's almost a weekly thing where these kids got to be coddled, or whatever it is, or you got to make sure that everyone's made happy. And how these kids, these kids talk about what they're getting. I know that they're supposed to, a lot of them have signed NDAs and all that stuff, but there's no way those other kids in the locker room don't know what guys they're bringing in or making. And that was part of the issue in Oxford, I guess, was that they said, oh, well, Kiffin's telling everybody what they're making. And it's like, well, part of that problem is you're paying all these new guys who haven't done shit for you more than you're paying the guys who took you to your best season in 60 plus years. So, they have a right to be upset about that. That's not, that's happening. So
and
it's
is
not
that
their fault.
yeah, is that Kiffin's fault? It's
No,
not.
no.
It's if you just because it came out, that's not Kiffin's fault. It's Ole Miss's fault. It's Golding.
Yeah.
Uh, it's the group there that came over from LSU that helped make part of those decisions. Um, that is Ole Miss's problem that they've got to deal with and that they created. I mean, let's be honest. If if I'm a school, why wouldn't you want to be transparent with your players?
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I
about
agree.
that. And so that's theirs. And I'll just say this about Ole Miss: if you, and it, they're going to be worse. Running back, they won't be worse because they're keeping Lacey. If Shambliss comes back, obviously they won't be worse at quarterback. But when you don't have the wide receivers, they're going to be much worse there. Your offensive line is going to be much worse. Shambliss will not have the same year because he's not going to have the talent around him outside of Lacey. You go over to the defensive side without Prince, their defensive line will not be as strong, even though their tackles will be okay. And their linebackers, you can't lose both your starting linebackers and be
Yeah.
as strong next year. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Perkins and Daughtery were both ball players too.
Yep. So um, they're they're going to be worse at every position outside of quarterback and running back than they were this year. It's a major step back coming for that program.
I think so too, and I'm really curious, to see what their offensive scheme becomes with or without Chambliss. I'm really curious. Who's their new OC?
Oh, he's from East Carolina, I believe it was. Let
Okay,
me
yeah,
see here.
I'm I'm really curious to see what type of offense he runs.
I will say this: he has been around Kiffin um, and some of those guys and left and came, so he's coming back. But to your point, he's not going to be Charlie Weiss. That part is not. John David Baker
Okay,
from East Carolina uh, is their new one. He worked under Kiffin as a co-offensive coordinator and tight ends coach from 21 to 23, but he hadn't been there the last couple of years. He left to go to be the OC at East Carolina, so he's familiar. But again, he's not Lane. He's not Charlie Weiss. Let's just see where East Carolina, how their offense performed. While I'm looking that up, let's go. A couple more winners and losers for me. North Texas, obviously losing Morris, loser there, where they lost a lot of talent to Oklahoma State. So I would say that Oklahoma State was a winner there. Another team that lost a lot as far as depth is Ohio State. They lost to Delane to LSU and others, so they still got a lot of top end talent. Um, but they lost a lot of depth. So, what does that do for teams? And I think that's, the thing that a portal does. It's happened to Georgia the last few years is you lose a lot of your talent, and that hurts your depth. And if you have some injuries, it can impact your season. Um, from that, so those would be my winners and losers for the most part. I'm looking here, kind of offensive rankings. Uh, Offense 2025 for East Carolina. 24th nationally in scoring, 32 points a game, nearly 450 yards a game. So they had some success. But, again, if you're not good at the line of scrimmage, it can be tough. So
yeah. So
5.84 yards per play is nothing to be excited about. Seven's the magical number there. So 5.8, it's not a bad number, but that's not an outstanding number in yards per play. Go ahead.
no, and I think his background is obviously why he's there. He has familiarity with Ole Miss and Golding, so I don't know if that was a best available hire or someone considered, you know, best to keep the train on the tracks for what we have going. Um,
Right.
which I mean, it can work out at times. I mean, we tried to go from Slinger and Joe Brady to Pete's and Mangus, and they just didn't,
Wasn't
didn't
the
turn
same.
out the same.
No.
So I mean, it can go both ways. But I agree with you. I think that regardless of who is calling what in Oxford next year, I think that the depth on that offensive line is really going to sting, and the scheme means a lot too. Listen, um, we've saw it with Sloan at LSU. It wasn't that these kids weren't talented. When the other team knows what you're going to call 80% of the time, it's really hard to be successful. On offense like that. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next year. But it all starts with Chambliss. If Chambliss doesn't come back, they're going to be in trouble. And that's not a knock at Deuce Knight or Walker Howard. That's just the way it is. They're both good players in their own right, but Chambliss was special. What he did for that team this year was special, and I think the combination of they've said that the one kid Caden Leaves from here in Marietta, that he'd come back if Chambliss came back. So I don't know how much truth there is to that. They're saying he's protecting himself. Well, if he's an Ole Miss guy, what's he protecting himself from? If Chambliss isn't there, they get that he's going to leave, or because I can promise you, if Chambliss came back and he still left, they would hate his guts. Or if Chambliss left and he left, they're still going to be pissed at him. They might understand it a little better, but it'll still be upsetting for them. So, said it's just and they're not the only fan base like that. LSU, we'd be the same way if our program, if we thought we got pillaged the way they feel as well. And again, it's on my soapbox again, it's the NCAA and their inability to govern anything correctly that has turned college football into just the biggest financial shit show in the history of sports.
It is, and again, hopefully they'll do something with establishing someone as a commissioner. Bring the conference commissioners together. It starts with the Big Ten, the SEC, and get some agreement and do some things legally with collective bargaining. Again, in contracts, they've got to be able to clean that part up in this. And the bill that has been setting in Congress that they want that exemption. There's only one bill that they've been working on, and this has gone on for 2-3 years now. And so I think you got to give that one up. I think you got to say, okay, we gotta see it for what it is, and we've got to understand that collective bargaining is going to be part of this, and just accept it, set some things up. Let players negotiate every so often for a percentage of the revenue. Look, they're already getting more than that anyway, so it's not going to get any worse. And your reference earlier about these $40 million payrolls, my fear is, you have 10 teams that can go out and do that right now. But what are those teams going to do if you don't win? I mean, these people that are throwing that money out there, they got to win, right? I mean, they want something. They're going to want. These are successful business people that want a return on their investment. What happens if these teams don't win? How quick does that money get cut off? And you go from a team that has been really good, you go to 500 and you get apathy quickly in your fan base. And that's not going to be good for the game because you got Texas, you got Texas A&M, LSU's jumping in this year with a bunch of money. You got, Ohio State's the same way. What happens if those teams have a couple 4-loss seasons and that money starts drying up, and then you get apathy amongst the program? That's not going to be good for college sports because you got big name schools that are involved in this.
No, I totally agree. It's just not it's not a feasible. The way it's set up is just something. It's doomed to fail. The system as it is today is going to destroy college football. They can't change it quick enough. But because it's the NCAA, nothing will happen soon because why fix something today when you can wait until all hell breaks loose to try to come in and beg somebody else to fix it for you, which I think is the end game of the the commissioner and everybody else in NCAA footballs. They're waiting for the government to step in and fix it, and that way they can step back and say, hey, we didn't have anything to do with this. The government made us do things this way, just because they don't have the balls to do the right thing anyway, and protect these schools from themselves. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's what's happening is they're eating themselves alive. When you've got people dumping all this money into one particular sport, Football carries the note for all the other sports programs at probably 90+% of the colleges in America, at least the D1 colleges, the Power Fours for sure, and probably most of the Group 5 as well. So when you lose that, when you start getting when the separation becomes larger, and those smaller donors, the guys who are donating 10,000 or 20,000, when those guys start to dry up because they're not seeing anything, it doesn't hurt just the sports. It hurts admissions. It hurts everything, and it can't go on like this. People don't understand how important football revenue is to college in general. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, it's football. Let everybody else worry about themselves." That's not how this works. It's college. If it were a professional team, great. That's how it works. The Lakers aren't going to help the Rams. I get it, but at LSU, football needs to help the baseball and the gymnastics and the track and everything else because that's the way these institutions were all set up. Hopefully someone comes in to fix this sooner rather than later, because like we've both said, 40 million a year is just insane to keep going back to these well-heeled alums and saying, hey, I know you gave 3 million last year, but can we get another 3 million this year? Can we count on you for that? you know there's going to be a lot of these guys who have donated 10, 20, 30 million dollars, and their team's not going to even have a 10-win season in the next 5 years, and they're going to be standing there like, God, I love my school, but eh, how these guys have made a lot of money because they're smart, not because they're wasteful and
That's right.
throwing millions a year at a college football team that let's say they win 10 games a year. Okay, great. 10 games is awesome, but it's not going to win you a national championship.
That is exactly right.
So hopefully somebody comes in and fixes it, and soon. I don't know who, don't care who. I just wanted to be like it was. Like I said, there was an interview with Coach Orgeron. I saw it online. The interview happened in the last probably 6 months or so, but they said, Coach, you've been out of the game for a while. How is NIL going to change what you do? And he was, Coach O being Coach O, he said, listen, he says, yeah, he goes, it's the same. He goes, back then we used to carry the money through the back door. Now we just got to bring it through the front door. And he's exactly right. So, it's you know, hopefully it'll get better.
It's got to.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, any last thoughts about tomorrow's game? We did kind of cover it quite a bit. Anything matchup wise, key to the game that you want to say about tomorrow's game?
Like I said, my key to the game is Miami's front seven, their ability to make Mendoza uncomfortable, and to stop the run. If Miami can keep that run game in check, I think that's going to force Indiana to throw the ball a little more, and that's not what they do. So I'm looking forward to the like you had been saying for 2 weeks now. These lines, both offensive lines versus both defensive lines, those are the matchups. I know Mendoza's the Heisman winner. I know Carson Beck, everyone, and Tony and all this, that, and the other. But those units right there is where it's going to be decided.
Yep, I agree with that. And again, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Indiana's wide receivers, what they can do against the secondary, and then Fletcher can Fletcher continue to play well behind that offensive line, Miami. Last matchup or last intriguing thing that I think is important in that game tomorrow is yards on first down. Both teams want to play on schedule. Both teams want to play third and short. Both teams want to, be good on third down, and both teams have been good on third down in the playoffs. Well, the key to that is your yards on first down. So I think that's would be the last stat that I say that'll be important to watch is what it might be both teams, and which would lead to a very fun, good game down to the wire. But what are yards on first down for these teams tomorrow? So
Yeah, very, very. That's yeah. I mean, both teams live off of third and short, so putting themselves in position to be there is going to be that. The one last thing I wanted to bring up was just special teams.
yeah,
Nico Radicic is 16 to 17 on field goals this year and 84 for extra points. Carter Davis is 17 to 23 on the year. They didn't have his extra points stats in the postseason though. Davis is 3 for 7, so he's struggled in the postseason. That's something that that's something that could be be the difference between being a national champion and and a runner up. So I'm looking forward to that. Like I said, Miami 24-20. I don't know how it happens. Beck's going to come up with a big play. I think the defense is going to come up with a turnover or something in the second half that flips the switch for Miami, and that's how they win. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, looking forward to a great game. Everybody enjoy it. It's going to be cold across the country tomorrow, so stay inside your house, stay warm, and enjoy the national championship. And then it'll be 9 months again, and college football will start again. So it's been a great season.
Maybe Southern Sports Gumbo hops on tonight at tomorrow night at halftime with or after the game with a little recap, depending on how it goes. But like, follow, subscribe, tell a friend, tell an enemy, let everybody know. Trying to build this up a little bit. Basketball season's coming, but so is the content. So I hope everybody has a great week. Be safe out there.
Yep. Have a good night.